Hello there, I'm Jake. Welcome back to another slow story from the quiet corners of boring history. The kind of story you can listen to with your eyes half closed, while the world outside turns still and silent. Tonight, we're drifting back through time to talk about something that's been part of human life for thousands of years. It's something people have smoked, sipped, prayed with, and even feared. It's the story of weed, marijuana, cannabis, and how human beings first began to use it. Not the wild, loud version that belongs to modern parties or protests, but the ancient, slow, almost sacred story of a plant that traveled through time with us. So take a deep breath. Let your shoulders fall back into your pillow. Let the quiet hum of your room blend with the softness of my voice. And as the night deepens, let's begin. Long before cities, before kings, before writing, humans were already experimenting with the world around them. They discovered fire. They learned to cook food, to warm themselves, to protect against darkness. And somewhere, in that same ancient curiosity, they discovered that plants could do more than just feed the body. Some could change how the mind felt. Imagine a fire crackling quietly at the edge of a cave. A small group of people huddled near it, wrapped in animal skins. Someone tosses a handful of dried leaves into the flames. A strange scent rises. The smoke drifts and curls. Someone coughs, then laughs softly. The world suddenly feels a little slower, a little lighter. No one writes it down, no one names it, but a relationship has begun between humans and smoke, between curiosity and calm. Thousands of years later, we'd call it cannabis, but back then, it was just another plant, waiting to be understood. When archaeologists search through the ashes of ancient campfires, they sometimes find traces of seeds, charred leaves, and strange residues, clues from people who lived so long ago that their names and languages are lost. The earliest solid evidence of cannabis smoking comes from around 2,500 years ago in the mountains of western China. In wooden braziers, researchers found burned stones and traces of THC, the chemical that gives cannabis its effect. These people lived on the cold, dry steppes of Central Asia, the crossroads of ancient trade routes. They were nomads, herders, and travelers, always moving, always watching the horizon. At night, their tents glowed softly in the dark, fires burning, songs humming through the wind, and in those tents, they burned cannabis, not by accident, but with intention. Maybe it was for ritual, maybe for mourning, maybe for quiet connection. The air filled with fragrant smoke. The mind grew soft and open, and somewhere in that stillness, people felt close to the mysteries of life and death. It's strange to think, but what we call getting high today was once perhaps a kind of prayer. As the fire burns low, imagine a figure sitting cross-legged beside it, a shaman, wrapped in fur, eyes closed. In his hands, a small clay bowl. Inside, glowing stones, and over them, crushed green leaves. He breathes deeply, the smoke rising and falling with his breath. Others watch, silent. For them, the smoke was not just a trick of the mind. It was a bridge between worlds, between humans and spirits. In the quiet pulse of the night, the line between dream and waking blurred. This, perhaps, is where the spiritual story of cannabis begins. Before it was medicine, Before it was outlawed, it was sacred. Let's drift now, softly, to another land, to ancient India, where the Ganges River flows under the endless sun. Here, the air is thick with the smell of spice and smoke. And in small temples shaded by banyan trees, people prepare a drink called bang. Bhang, made from crushed cannabis leaves, milk, and sweet spices, is considered sacred to Lord Shiva, the Hindu god of transformation. In old stories, they say the gods stirred the ocean of milk, and from it came poison. And to cool that poison, Shiva drank bhang. From then on, cannabis was seen as a divine gift, something that cools the body, soothes the mind, and opens the spirit. Imagine sitting under that warm Indian sky. You hear the soft jingle of bells. You see monks and travelers resting by the river, sharing small cups of bhang, smiling gently, their words slow and thoughtful. This wasn't rebellion. It wasn't medicine. It was peace. Even today, in parts of India, bhang is still prepared during festivals like Holi, shared among friends in celebration of joy and rest. The same ritual, still alive after thousands of years. Across the Himalayas, in ancient China, another story was unfolding. The Chinese didn't smoke cannabis the way others did. They studied it. They wrote about it. They classified it. In the Shennong Ben Sao Jing, a medical text from around 2700 BCE, cannabis, or ma, is listed as both a medicine and a crop. The seeds were used for nourishment, the oil for cooking, the stalks for rope and cloth. Ancient Chinese doctors believed cannabis helped with pain, rheumatism, and even absent-mindedness, but they also knew it was powerful and warned that too much could make one see ghosts. Imagine an old apothecary lit by oil lamps, shelves lined with wooden drawers labeled with calligraphy, a doctor in a silk robe measuring out herbs with steady hands. Outside, paper lanterns sway in the wind. For them, cannabis wasn't a vice or mystery. It was a gift of nature, used with balance and care. The hemp plant itself was part of daily life. From clothing to fishing nets, from rope to paper, it was woven into everything. A quiet, constant companion to civilization. Let's travel west now, to the golden deserts of Egypt. The Nile glows like liquid glass under the moon. The pyramids rise dark against the sky. And somewhere near Thebes, an Egyptian healer grinds herbs under the flicker of an oil lamp. In the Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE, scholars found mention of a plant called shemshemet, believed to be cannabis. It was used to treat inflammation and eye pain. Mixed with honey and oil, it was applied gently to the skin. Picture the healer dipping a reed brush into the mixture, placing it carefully on the patient's eyelids. The air smells of resin, honey, and smoke. Outside, the river murmurs in the dark. Even here, in the shadow of pyramids, people knew of cannabis. Not as pleasure, not as rebellion, but as comfort. And then, across the sea, in the marble lands of Greece and Rome, cannabis found new purposes again. Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described a group called the Scythians, nomadic horsemen from the steppes, who threw hemp seeds onto hot stones, sat inside small tents, and inhaled the vapor. They would shout with joy, he wrote, and the ritual seemed to cleanse them. The Greeks watched and wondered. To them, it was both strange and fascinating. A people who danced in smoke. The Romans, ever practical, didn't chase visions. They used hemp for their ships, sails, ropes, and oil. Imagine a Roman harbor at sunset, ships rocking gently, ropes creaking, sailors rubbing hemp oil onto tired hands. For them, the plant was work, not wonder, but it still tied their lives to the same ancient tradition: humans and hemp, side by side. As centuries drifted on, Europe fell into the quiet hush of the Middle Ages. The grand empires had faded, monasteries dotted the countryside, and within their stone walls, monks copied texts and pressed herbs into tonics. Cannabis, now mostly grown as hemp, filled the fields again. It wasn't smoked or worshipped, but used every day. Ropes, sails, clothing, parchment, all from the same plant. In kitchens, hemp seeds were ground into porridge. In workshops, hemp oil lit lamps. Outside Europe, though, another world still breathed with smoke. In Persia, Egypt, and across the Middle East, mystics known as Sufis used hashish, the concentrated form of cannabis resin, as part of meditation. They said it opened the heart, made prayer deeper, made love more real. While the West prayed in silence, the East prayed in clouds. The smoke rose like a whisper of devotion, slow, fragrant, endless. The centuries moved on, slowly, quietly, as they always do. Empires fell, new ones rose. Trade routes stretched across deserts, mountains, and seas. And with them, the humble green plant continued its journey. From Asia to Africa, from Africa to Europe, from Europe to the Americas, carried in sacks of seed, hidden in bundles of cloth, woven into ropes, mixed into oils. Everywhere humans went, it followed. By the time ships crossed the Atlantic, carrying explorers, farmers, and dreams of new worlds, they carried hemp seeds too. In the 1600s, English colonists in North America were required by law to grow hemp. It was needed for ropes, sails, paper, the machinery of empire. Picture it: wide fields of tall green stalks swaying in the coastal wind, farmers cutting them slowly, bundling them together, never imagining that one day the same plant would be forbidden. Back then, it was just work, just another crop under the sun. But in the quiet corners of medicine, doctors were still curious. By the 1800s, scientists in Europe began studying cannabis again, not as rope, but as remedy. In 1839, an Irish doctor named William O'Shaughnessy, working in India, published research on the medical use of cannabis. He had seen it used by Indian healers to treat pain, spasms, and insomnia. He brought it back to England, and suddenly, cannabis tinctures appeared in pharmacies across Europe and America. Imagine walking into a Victorian apothecary. Glass jars line the shelves, labels in cursive: laudanum, opium, cannabis extract. The air smells faintly of alcohol and herbs. A doctor writes slowly with a fountain pen, 2 drops before sleep. For decades, cannabis was quietly trusted, a gentle helper for pain, nerves, and sleepless nights. It was in medicine cabinets, on the shelves of families, prescribed by doctors in calm, measured tones. No one thought of it as dangerous. No one called it weed. It was just part of life. But history, like the tide, always turns. As the 1900s began, the world was changing fast. Cities buzzed with electricity. Trains thundered through the night. Science became law, and politics began to shape what people could and couldn't feel. In the United States, new immigration waves brought new cultures, and with them, new uses of the same old plant. Mexican laborers called it marijuana. Black jazz musicians smoked it to unwind after long nights in smoky clubs. Writers and poets whispered about it as a doorway to creativity, but governments grew uneasy. They saw it spreading, not as medicine, but as pleasure, and they feared what they didn't understand. So laws began to tighten. Propaganda films spread fear. The word marijuana became tangled with suspicion and prejudice. By 1937, the United States passed the Marijuana Tax Act, effectively making cannabis illegal. And so, what was once sacred, then medicinal, then ordinary, became forbidden. Imagine that silence. Millions of fields turned to dust. Pharmacies quietly removing bottles from their shelves. Doctors no longer prescribing it. For the first time in thousands of years, human civilization turned its back on one of its oldest companions. But even silence has cracks, and through them, whispers began again. It's now the 1960s. The world is loud, colorful, restless. Young people are questioning everything: war, authority, and even sleep. And once again, smoke drifts through the air. In San Francisco's parks, in London's cafes, in the humid nights of Jamaica, people rediscover the same old calm. They roll it, light it, and share it. They call it peace, love, expansion. They call it freedom. Songs are written, art is made, and the same plant that once sat quietly beside ancient shamans now hums in the hands of musicians and dreamers. Governments call it rebellion, but maybe, deep down, it's just the same ancient curiosity, the same search for softness in a hard world. By the 1970s, research slowly returned. Doctors began to wonder again. Could this plant really help with pain? Could it calm nerves, ease sickness, help people rest? And quietly, science began to say yes. In laboratories, they found something hidden in our bodies, receptors that responded to cannabis naturally. An endocannabinoid system woven into us from birth. That discovery changed everything, because it meant the relationship between humans and cannabis wasn't just cultural, it was biological. We were made to respond to it. Just as ancient people felt peace under smoke, we too are wired for calm. Now, imagine this moment. It's the early 2000s. Cities glow with screens. Life is faster than ever. And yet, quietly, one law after another begins to shift. First for medicine, then for recreation, then for healing the damage of years past. In some places, the plant becomes legal again. Dispensaries open, doctors prescribe, and the smoke rises once more, not in fear, but in freedom. So as we sit here now, in this quiet hour, let's look back, slowly, at what we've seen. The first fires and the first smoke. The shamans in their tents. The priests by the Ganges. the doctors in ancient China, the healers of Egypt, the sailors of Rome, the monks of Europe, the mystics of Persia, the doctors of the 19th century, the dreamers of the 20th. All of them, different languages, different worlds, but all breathing the same smoke, feeling the same slow calm. Maybe that's what makes this story so human. We've always searched for peace, in prayer, in music, in warmth, and sometimes in a plant that grows quietly by the riverbank. When we trace its history, we're really tracing our own, our desire to soften the sharp edges of life, to slow time just enough to remember who we are. And now, as the night stretches long and still, as the world outside fades to shadow, let's rest with that thought. The same stars that watch the first smoke rise still watch us now. The same earth that grew those early leaves still grows them today. Nothing has really changed. Only the names, the laws, the fears, but not the quiet human need for calm. So close your eyes. Breathe softly and imagine you're sitting beside that first ancient fire. The air is cool. The sky is wide and endless. Someone beside you tosses a few leaves into the flames. The smoke curls upward, slow and silver. You breathe in. You feel warm. The world feels a little softer. You hear laughter, a whisper of wind, and the steady rhythm of the fire. You could be anywhere, in the past, in the present, in some endless in-between. Because stories like this one, they never really end. They drift like smoke into the quiet. I'm Jake, and this has been Boring History for Sleep. Thank you for staying awake long enough to listen, or for falling asleep somewhere in the middle, which is perfectly fine. Good night, and sleep well.